Hello everyone. I wanted to give you a little bit of feedback about the exam going into the second chunk of material that will be on the second exam. First of all, I want to say I'm not going to go through each question in detail in any of this presentation. I am willing to do that, however, if you do have questions. So at any point in the coming week, if you would like to come to my office hours to go over anything you missed on the exam, that is fine. Potentially, there will be time to do that as well when we have lab this week, but I would request that you complete the lab activity and submit it for your group before having those conversations. And I might not be able to have all of them if everyone is getting done at the same time. But I am willing to discuss this more if you want specific details. It is difficult to give that kind of feedback in the format we have right now in terms of something written down. But I'm willing to go through that with you individually if that's something that you would appreciate. So just be aware of that as well. So I wanted to start this presentation by discussing kind of the expectations I had going into this exam and what I was going to be doing to support you in meeting those expectations. So these expectations, first of all, were stated both in the review video as well as within the exam itself. Some of these you signed your name to that you understood. These are the expectations of what you will do on this exam. Canvas had the time limit within that as well. So the expectations were the exam should be completed within 90 minutes, and then you submit it to Canvas when you are done. And then additional to that, not to consult with another person or check the internet for answers. So those were kind of the three expectations in terms of not specific to chemistry knowledge, but specific to the ways in which you would go about completing the exam. I did want to make it a priority that I would be available during the exam for any technical questions that came up related to difficulties with submission of the exam mainly, or if there was a clarification of a specific question, I could answer that as well. So I was present throughout the full 3 hours in the Zoom, and I did answer some of your questions there. I did speak to several of you during that time. And then I was also checking emails at the same time. For the emails, I didn't always respond, within 30 seconds to those, partially because I was often speaking with someone in Zoom or responding to another email. So I got several emails coming in at kind of the same time, but I do believe I got back to everybody on anything that came through in questions in that way during the exam itself. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how this went related to a few things. So the first one was submission. So many of you were able to submit it exactly the way I had expected. You got done within the 90-minute time limit. Were able to upload the full exam to Canvas as a single document. What I realized in the middle of the exam, based on some student feedback, was that some students were having difficulty with the process of uploading their exam to Canvas as a single document. I was not expecting that difficulty because I had previous activities that you've done where you have been uploading multiple pages as a single document. So I had assumed that was enough kind of training with that process that everybody would be comfortable with that. But it looks like some of you were not comfortable with that process. Because of that, that is not something you are penalized for. So if you were having some difficulties with that process and you did email it to me, as a result of those difficulties, you're not going to be penalized for that. But the people that did do it the way that I had expected are going to get a little bit of extra credit because of that. And we'll come back later and talk about the ramifications of that. But the difficulty here was that some students then emailed their exams well beyond the 90-minute time limit. That is a difficulty because the 90-minute time limit was there for a reason. And so if that was your situation, your exam was marked down somewhat based on the fact that there was a 90-minute time limit and it took you longer than that to complete it and turn it in to me. It's not fair to the students who did submit on time. Often I had some coming in, 84 minutes, 82 minutes, 88 minutes, that had several blank things on their exam because they understood that there was a time limit and they were going to get it done on time. So to have someone else turn theirs in with an extra half hour of time beyond that without any kind of penalty for that extra time isn't really fair to the students that did understand the assignment and complete it on time. So be aware as you're looking at your exam, there will be a time listed on the feedback, and that time goes into potentially some lowering of your grade if you needed more than the 90-minute time limit. So a little bit more about the time limit and resources here. So the time limit was 90 minutes. However, if this had been an in-person class exam, the time limit would have been 75 minutes. So I'm actually giving you a generous 15 minutes of time for any technical things such as printing, downloading, uploading. I don't expect that will take 15 minutes, but I know people are in different situations. So this should have been something you had plenty of time to complete in the 90 minutes that you had compared to the 75 minutes that we would have had for an in-person class. And part of the reason I think this happened for many of you is, and I mentioned this in the review video for this exam, open book exams are actually more challenging sometimes than closed book exams because you have this temptation to look everything up. The expectation here is that you know the material well enough that you don't have to go through and look at examples of each question as you see them. You've done these before. If you have some uncertainty about some types of problems, maybe you bookmark where to look those up, and that's fine if you're doing that. But if you look at the question and it feels like it's the first time you've seen anything like this and you go through your book trying to find an example, you'll probably get that one right eventually, but you're not going to have time to get the rest of them right. So that's the challenge with an open book exam, is there is a time limit, and that time limit means you still have to know the material. Another thing that came up here is I saw a few places where there were some rather complicated questions where people did not show their work, and they're not the kind of questions that I would expect you to be able to do in your head. So you miss points for those. And the reason you miss points for those is because they're also the type of question that you can find the answer to online. So I'm not saying that that's what everyone who missed points in that way did for those questions, but I need to see your work to know that you have done it yourself. So if that's the situation for you, you're not failing the exam because of that. You're just missing some of the points you would have got for that particular question. However, there are cases that I did see where some people did answer questions in a way that would not be possible without using the internet. Specifically, what I'm thinking about here is if there's an answer that is technically correct for the question, but gets into material that we haven't covered in this course. There's not really a way for you to get that answer unless you looked it up on the internet. Okay, so when that situation comes up, basically you're just going to get a 0 on the exam for that. And that's something that was very clear going in. You can't talk to someone else. You can't look it up on the internet. So if you did get a correct answer that was not related to something we covered in the course, then you will get a 0 on this exam. Unfortunately, I really do not like to do that. I would prefer that that's not something that comes up in this course, but it's not fair to the students who are doing the expected work. And you you've acknowledged that that's what you're going to do, and if you don't do that, there needs to be a consequence for that. I want to say a few things about the rest of the semester so that you know how to plan accordingly. First thing I want to say is that the grading of this exam for some of you might be more lenient than it should be. So there were some accommodations made related to those difficulties with uploading and related to time issues as well. That won't be made again. So if your grade is dependent upon those issues, don't expect that to happen again. So some of you did fine. If you didn't have any of those issues, whatever grade you got, you can expect to get a similar grade. But if that was a challenge, that's something we need to figure out before the second exam. And one thing I will do is I will come up with some activity before the second exam where you'll be able to maybe practice with this sort of uploading a document as a single document that has more than one page. So that's not what the course is about, but that's kind of how we have to grade it and have to assess it. So we'll have time to talk about that in more detail. But because those challenges came up with a few of you kind of in the course of the exam, I had to provide some accommodations for that. So those won't happen again. So don't plan on that being how you pass the class if you're in that situation. So you don't have to feel guilty about how the first exam went, but you just want to understand that that's not the expectation for the course. On the other hand, if you did struggle on this exam, it doesn't have to hold you back. That doesn't have to be the end of the line for you. Remember that you can replace your lowest exam grade with the average of the quiz scores. So if something about this exam really kind of threw you off what you thought was going on, doesn't mean that you're done. Okay, you can replace that. So the whole point of having that in place is so that you can't have a bad day. It doesn't have to, whether it's something beyond your control or not, it's a way of allowing for that. Having said that, if you do want to do, so this could be about either of those first 2 points. If you do want to do better than you did on the first exam, you might have to do something different from here on out. One thing to look at with that is you can look on Canvas. There's a way to do kind of figure out what your grade will be in the course by putting in, what if I got this grade instead of that grade on the exam. So you can look at, related to if things were a bit more lenient for you this time around, and what would that look like if you didn't have those accommodations this time. You can put in a what if grade for that. But more importantly than that, you want to think about how you're preparing for the course and how you could prepare for it differently. So if we look at maybe what we do in our lab times together, are you just going with what your group is doing, or are you making sure you understand the material before the group moves on? So I will support you if you want to kind of slow things down in your group and make sure you understand it and you're not just sort of going along with things. Make sure you're doing all the worksheets, know the answers to those. Put those up on the discussion board as questions. You could ask as many of those as you need to. Okay, so make sure you understand all of those. If you have understood all of those worksheets, that's essentially what you need to do well on these exams. So the same thing will be true for the second exam. And then finally, I hope this does not apply to you, but the drop deadline is coming up this week on the 9th of October. It was very important to me that I get this graded for you before that day, so you know if that's something that you would need to consider. I'm not going to say that's something you need to do. I don't know your particular situation, but it's something that you should be deciding this week if that does apply to you. So that's a little bit of feedback I wanted to give you before we move into the next module. Some of you are probably already in the next module. But again, if you have specific exam questions, we can go through those. Come to office hours if you would like to. or you can ask at the end of lab if your group is done a bit early. I will see you all in lab this coming week.